This request does not feel like an emergency, and let me move on. Secretary Hegseth, like most Americans, I've had a lot of trouble following this administration's contradictory statements about the war. On April 8th, you said, and I quote, "Their missile program is functionally destroyed, launchers, production facilities, and existing stockpiles depleted and decimated and almost completely ineffective." Mr. Secretary, Iran has been firing at U.S. military bases in the region and its ships for the last week. How is it possible, if their capabilities were, quote, functionally destroyed 3 months earlier, as she claimed, for them to be doing this now?
Well, Senator, Iran is at the weakest point militarily it has ever been in the past decade. Certainly, maybe in 47 years, as they've gathered effectively a terror army. And that terror army was built to try to create conventional capabilities to defend against a pursuit of nuclear weapons, which meant thousands of ballistic missiles, many of which we have destroyed, others of which they have put inside facilities and hidden in underground facilities. And that's what terror regimes would do.
Senator Patty Murray, Vice Chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, delivers a sharp grilling of defense. Secretary Pete Hegseth, during a hearing on the Trump administration's supplemental funding request tied to the Iran conflict, Murray opens by laying out the numbers. The Pentagon already received a massive $150 billion boost last year through Republican legislation, plus a record $839 billion for fiscal year 2026, totaling over $1 trillion. Yet, she notes, the department still hasn't spent half of its reconciliation funds. Despite this, the administration is back asking for tens of billions, more in an emergency supplemental, much of which she argues has little to do with Iran or qualifies as truly urgent.
Thank you, Chair Collins. Secretary Hegseth, your department received $150 billion last year in the Republicans' Big Beautiful Bill. It also received a record $839 billion for fiscal year 2026, more money than you asked for last year. Combined, that is a $1 trillion budget for the year, and as I already mentioned, your department has yet to spend half of the reconciliation funds. And despite that, you are here today asking for tens of billions of dollars more for things that you've already asked for in your FY27 request or that have nothing to do with Iran. This administration has tried to sell this as an emergency request, but it may be better understood as an attempt to skirt the normal appropriations process. Here are just a few of the things requested in this Iran supplemental. $800 million for the National Guard to patrol D.C. even longer. Over $1 billion for the Army to patrol the southern border, which is DHS's job. $900 million to support the administration's illegal boat strikes in the Caribbean. Over $18 billion for munitions, which you've already requested in your FY27 budget request, and $1.7 billion to pay for your decision to recruit more people than the services need, which was not contemplated by the FY26 funding bill Congress recently passed. Now, you've already submitted a reprogramming request on this that our subcommittee is considering now, which really underscores the point I made in my opening remarks that the problem is not a lack of money, but poor planning. So I'll be blunt. The truth is your request does not make a lot of sense. So let me ask you a simple question. Why exactly are billions of dollars more for the National Guard and this administration's illegal strikes in the Caribbean urgently needed for the Iran war?
Well, Senator, I wouldn't, of course, agree with your characterization, but why this kind of spending is needed is because of the gross negligence and neglect of the Biden administration inside our department. Ran it like a bureaucracy, abandoned our strength posture around the world, so we're having to reestablish deterrence. You mentioned the end strength numbers, and I will acknowledge that we are ahead of schedule on end strength in recruiting. 8,000 in the Navy, 6,000 in the Army, 4,000 in the Air Force. Because under President Trump, there's been record and historic over 30-year recruiting records inside our department since he won the election, because the American people didn't want to sign up for what Joe Biden was providing our military.
Let me
and they want to sign up for what President Trump is doing in his leadership. And so those are good problems to have that we need to fund and a reflection of momentum. And this budget will allow us to continue the kind of momentum that gets us ahead.
My point is that a lot of this request does not feel like an emergency. And let me move on. Secretary Hegseth, like most Americans, Republicans, I've had a lot of trouble following this administration's contradictory statements about the war. On April 8th, you said, and I quote, "Their missile program is functionally destroyed, launchers, production facilities, and existing stockpiles depleted and decimated and almost completely ineffective." Mr. Secretary, Iran has been firing at U.S. military bases in the region and its ships for the last week. How is it possible, if their capabilities were, quote, "functionally destroyed" 3 months earlier, as she claimed, for them to be doing this now?
Well, Senator, Iran is at the weakest point militarily it has ever been in the past decade. Certainly, maybe in 47 years, as they've gathered effectively a terror army. And that terror army was built to try to create conventional capabilities to defend against a pursuit of nuclear weapons, which meant thousands of ballistic missiles, many of which we have destroyed, others of which they have put inside facilities and hidden in underground facilities. And that's what terror regimes would do. So I acknowledge they still have capabilities, no doubt. But the amount of damage that we've done to them over the course of these series of operations has put them in the worst place they've ever been.
Okay, well, let me move on. On May 5th, you claimed that Iran doesn't control the strait, and you said that there was a, quote, "powerful red, white, and blue dome over the strait." If that was true, how did Iran shrink ship traffic in the strait to a trickle again last week?
We pushed almost, I believe, between 400 and 500 million barrels of oil under the nose of Iran over the course of Project Freedom, which went underground, which I acknowledged after we did so covertly because it was more effective to do so quietly than to do so publicly. So we've been in control of moving traffic through there for quite some time. Well, they retain the ability to recklessly shoot at commercial shipping, and that's what happened. We had a ceasefire, and then they shot at commercial shipping
well, you
recklessly
also
as a state.
said at
That's
that
what changed
same press conference, and I'm going to quote you, you urged Iran to, quote, "let innocent ships pass freely. These international waters belong to all nations, not to Iran to tax, toll, or control." Last week, President Trump said the U.S. would charge a 20% toll to each ship to pass through the state. So based on your opposition to tolls, did you talk to the president out of that idea, or did someone else?
Iran's not charging tolls, and they're shooting at ships right now.
But Trump said that he wanted to charge a 20% toll.
We have a blockade right now of all Iranian ships in Iranian ports, and it's effective.
My time is out.
She highlights specific line items that raise eyebrows. $800 million for the National Guard to extend patrols in Washington, D.C., over $1 billion for the Army to handle southern border duties, traditionally under DHS, $900 million for operations in the Caribbean, over $18 billion for munitions, already requested in the regular FY27 budget, and $1.7 billion to cover recruiting goals that exceeded original plans. Murray calls this less an emergency and more an attempt to bypass normal appropriations processes, especially when reprogramming requests are already in motion. Her core question: why does this funding feel so disconnected from the stated Iran needs? Hegseth pushes back, framing the requests as necessary to fix what he calls the gross negligence of the previous Biden administration. He points to depleted global posture, abandoned deterrence, and the need to rebuild strength. On recruiting, he celebrates record highs under Trump, thousands ahead of schedule across services, calling them good problems, reflecting renewed momentum among Americans eager to serve. The exchange grows more pointed as Murray presses Hegseth on shifting public statements about Iran's capabilities. She quotes him from April, claiming Iran's missile program was functionally destroyed, launchers and stockpiles decimated. Yet weeks later, Iran was firing on U.S. bases and shipping. How does that square? Hegseth acknowledges remaining underground and hidden capabilities, but insists Iran is at its weakest military point in years, if not decades, thanks to U.S. operations. Murray continues with the Strait of Hormuz. Hegseth had boasted of a powerful red, white, and blue dome securing the area, yet ship traffic reportedly dropped sharply. He counters that the U.S. successfully moved hundreds of millions of barrels of oil covertly under Project Freedom. When she confronts him on Trump's reported idea of a 20% toll on ships, contrasting Hegseth's earlier opposition to Iran taxing or controlling the waters, the secretary pivots to the current blockade of Iranian vessels, rather than directly addressing the policy flip. This clip captures the partisan friction in Washington over war funding, accountability, and messaging consistency. Murray embodies the skeptical oversight role, demanding clarity on costs, priorities, and outcomes when domestic needs compete for resources. Hegseth defends the administration's reset of military posture and frames the spending as essential course correction after years of perceived neglect.